Source of Madness is a 2D side-scroller roguelite that uses procedural generation and a neural network AI to craft a bloody and brutal cosmic horror experience. If you know me, then you know that cosmic horror is one of my favorite genres of all time, and this idea of AI-generated monsters was practically calling my name. While the gameplay can definitely be messy in some departments, other than the blood and gore, innovative and interesting ideas scattered throughout the title's runtime kept me intrigued throughout my entire 16-hour playthrough from the start to the credits. Before we get started, please remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons if you enjoy my content. This is a really small channel, so every person makes a huge difference, especially since YouTube's algorithm is even more brutal than tearing the limbs off of these monsters. There are even more ways you can interact with or support my work, but more about that at the end of the video. For now, let's dive right back into the review.
On those baleful, moon-cursed nights, you can see the towers of madness staring back menacingly.
To start off, my first run through Source of Madness was brutal, in terms of both the disgustingly satisfying limb-severing mechanics and the difficulty of fighting off those sickening creatures for the first time. If you didn't catch it in my introduction, the monsters you'll be fighting throughout this game are AI-generated, meaning that the game uses a series of factors and body parts to craft your enemies on every level. The bodies and limbs of these creatures all have their own unique traits, movement, and attacks, meaning that they're a much bigger threat when you're still learning the game, but still a challenge in certain situations, even with hours of gameplay on your belt. While the general shapes of the monsters can be pretty similar to each other visually, I still really loved this mechanic. Where other games have specific classes of enemies that you learn to counter, Source of Madness keeps you on your toes at all times, with the randomized lumps of flesh and limbs around every corner, forcing you to constantly adapt as different combinations of movement and attacks are used against you. In contrast to my positive thoughts here, the starting weapons, also known as rings, were perhaps my greatest hurdle for the first few runs. These weapons, while visually interesting, are vastly underwhelming compared to every other piece of equipment in the game. I found myself completely vulnerable to damage when trying to focus on these close-ranged attacks, since there are no ways to defend yourself other than dashing away. However, once I progressed and started to unlock new rings and equipment, the combat became much more satisfying. With this in mind, let's transition over to the main gameplay experience. Source of Madness is mainly focused on ranged combat, using a wide variety of weapons with assorted elemental affinities and firing mechanics. From slow but destructive fireballs to long, piercing ice spears, the game gives you several different playstyles to mix and match as you progress. With the ability to use two rings simultaneously, I found a lot of ways to synergize my attacks to literally tear my enemies to shreds. This is a really good thing because the game has a huge emphasis on changing up your strategy as you play, thanks to the gear level mechanics. Essentially, all of your equipment has a level and rarity that determines the base and bonus stats that it gives. Rarity is completely random, but new item quality increases the further you progress in a run. What this means is that you'll have to make decisions between changing up your strategy for better stats, or sticking with what you have but at the cost of a lower damage output or health overall. As for what you can expect from each run, there are 3 main acts of the game's story, each with its own unique set of areas and possible enemy variants. As you kill monsters and loot treasure, you'll earn 3 different currencies: gold, blood, and even star. This system should be pretty familiar to people who play roguelites often. Gold is used in shops to purchase better equipment through a run and is lost on death. The other currencies, tainted blood and even star, which are earned from killing monsters and bosses respectively, are used to purchase permanent upgrades and unlocks before each new run, and are kept on death. All of these systems are pretty well balanced, although most of the permanent unlocks higher up in the tree cost a lot of blood and even star, so progress can slow down greatly when you get to the final act. Aside from the currencies, there are also several character classes to unlock from finding shrines as you progress, giving you access to new weapons and items, along with class-specific stats and abilities depending on which one you pick in each run. Probably the strongest aspect of Source of Madness, besides its AI generation, is its art and animation style. Now, I admit, I'm not normally a huge fan of the rigid 2D puppeting style of animation in video games, but somehow it works wonders for this game. If I had to describe the appearance of this game in one word, it would be Wriggly. The fleshy monsters are all extremely unsettling, not only in their mashup of limbs and eyes, but also in the way that they move and sound. Whether they fly, crawl, jump, or slide, those writhing and squelching mounds of eyes and teeth are a spectacle in and of themselves. Thanks to this puppet animation style, each of the limbs can move independently from each other and feel alive, even when randomly generated, which serves to both unnerve the player and further alienate these creatures, giving them traits of animals and insects but twisting them to feel wrong. This alienation of flesh, combined with the decrepit environments and dark art style, really solidify the themes and tones explored throughout the story. Speaking of which, this story that's split into 3 acts takes heavy inspiration from Lovecraft's works. If you're a fan of cosmic horror, this story has it all for you. Old and sleeping gods, incomprehensible beings from the stars, the spread of madness, an infested moon, Source of Madness proudly carries its inspirations on its back throughout the entire story. While it can feel cryptic at some points, as that's basically a staple of the genre, the bigger picture is pretty clear all throughout the game, even with the limited amount of information given throughout the story. In fact, the only issue I really had with the story is that there wasn't enough of it. While there are big events at the end of each act, there's not much in the way of storytelling in any other section of the game, aside from small text entries, dialogue, and vague trippy animated sequences. I would have loved it if the hub world went through more changes as the story progressed, but pretty much all of the dialogue stayed the same throughout my entire playthrough, which made the area feel too stagnant. While the game boasts huge, world-altering events, it feels like I'm coming into this world after all of the most interesting moments. More shifts in the game's environments and tone as the player finishes each act would have really brought home the cohesion between what the game says and what it shows. Now, as per usual, it's time to talk about some of the details and small issues I ran into while playing before wrapping up. First off, as I briefly mentioned in the gameplay section, the only way of defending yourself is avoiding monsters altogether, or more specifically, their limbs and projectiles. I say that because touching the monsters themselves doesn't actually harm you unless they're visibly toxic, and limbs only damage you after they start flashing, telegraphing attacks so you can try and react. This allows you to use the enemies themselves, along with their limbs, as platforms for maneuvering, which is especially interesting when fighting large bosses and mini-bosses. The problems with this arise from a lack of close combat options. The only real way to avoid getting hurt is to keep your distance, which not only locks you out of certain weapons because of the risk, but also slows down and complicates combat encounters in enclosed spaces. If there were some other way to negate damage besides the tiny shield that one class can use, it would open up a lot more strategies for combat besides dashing away and shooting, which can get stale when you're multiple runs into the same act. Another combat issue I dealt with is that bosses, while visually and mechanically interesting, are absolute bullet sponges. Surprisingly, this was more of a problem with mini-bosses and optional bosses than the actual act-ending fights. The spectacle of climbing around on these giant monsters and ripping them apart piece by piece is visually and mechanically awesome, but that feeling starts to die down when you realize just how long it takes to do this a lot of the time. This was especially a problem when fighting a specific optional boss later in the game, but it can also get in the way of the fun when you're just sitting in a corner blasting the same mound of flesh for several minutes. While these issues are all separate, they come together to make the game feel a bit repetitive once you've done several runs in each act. The bullet sponges, combined with the somewhat sluggish and ranged-focused combat, really slowed down my experience in certain areas, which made me start to hate some of these enemies when they previously felt so interesting and unique to fight. Aside from these issues, I'm happy to say that I didn't run into any noticeable bugs throughout my experience, which is a really nice treat in a newly released title. To sum up my thoughts, Source of Madness is a visually and mechanically interesting game that somehow feels deep and shallow at the same time. While there is a lot of diversity in playstyles, the gameplay itself forces you down a more narrow path of thinking, which betrays all of the work the developers put into the AI-generated monsters and weapon randomization that are meant to keep you from getting comfortable with one style of play. The story is very interesting, and the art and sound design reflect the themes very well, but in the end, it didn't feel like I was really affecting much, despite the grand events occurring in each act. It felt like having a delicious plate of food, but splitting that food into 3 separate courses throughout the day. Yeah, it was tasty, but it felt like there was something missing in each of those meals. That's why I'm giving Source of Madness a 7.9. All of the markings are there for a great little roguelike, and I had a bunch of fun playing around with the game's diverse weapons and monsters, but it's lacking small details that ultimately made new runs drag a bit during the late game experience. However, the developers have stated that more content is on the way, so who knows what this will be like down the road. If you're a fan of cosmic horror or roguelikes that won't take 100 hours of your life, then Source of Madness is a great title to get your next fix. Hey everyone, thanks for watching today's review. What did you think about the game? Are you also a big cosmic horror nerd like me? Let me know down in the comments, I check and respond to them all the time. Again, please like the video if it was helpful and subscribe to my channel for more gaming content like this. If you want to talk to me or see what I'm up to, you can check out my Twitter page at misspelled Moos, or follow my Twitch channel of the same name, where I play all kinds of games and give you sneak peeks into future videos. You could even join in and be a part of them. If you want to support my work directly, I do also have a Patreon. It's just $1 to support me, and your name will be featured in every video. All of these links can be found in the description below. Wow, you made it all the way to the end, huh? Well, here's a bit of life advice as a little reward for making it this far. Pouring oil into the pot while you're cooking pasta doesn't actually do anything. Use a little bit of salt instead, and you'll be a lot happier with the result. Anyways, I'll see you in the next one.